All right, good afternoon to one and all who's present here today. I think the situation looks just like how it appears when we teach the period after lunch back in our schools, right? Students walk in after lunch, feeling really nice and comfortable. It's a sort of mid-afternoon, and kind of students get comfortable, and then you have the teacher at the front of the room ready with the presentation and all ready to go. We really want to break away from this traditional way of the sage on the stage, not so much a sage, but there are in fact 3 of us today here on the stage. And just to set the ball rolling and to put it in context, before we launch the presentation, I'm going to give you about a minute to turn to the person sitting next to you, left or right, and talk about what inquiry-based means to you as a teacher. What does inquiry-based teaching and learning mean and look like in your classrooms? So if you could please turn to the person sitting next to you and have a minute or so of conversation, please. I understand a minute really seems short to be talking about an abstract concept like this. However, I hope it's sort of set the scene into what we're leading into today through this presentation. So good afternoon once again to all of you present here. I'm Sudha Sundar, as Maria just introduced. I'm an independent consultant for the concept-based curriculum model. And what is the concept-based curriculum is something that I will talk about in my presentation. In my role in the school as the curriculum coordinator, I work with teachers particularly during induction or orientation, as some of you may call it, in order to kind of get teachers on board with our model of curriculum philosophy. Joining me today in this presentation is Jason Schmidt, who teaches middle school English, and Jason also teaches the International Baccalaureate Grade 11 English program at our school, who will be kind of taking over the presentation halfway through. And also with us today is Ms. Maram Juma, who teaches Arabic as a foreign language for grade 11 and 12. So to give you an idea of the structure of this, not a workshop so much, of the presentation this afternoon, for about the first couple of minutes, I would give you an overview of what we mean when we say concept-based curriculum and what we mean when we say inquiry-based teaching and learning in our language classrooms. I would then hand it over to Jason, who would then share with you a typical unit that he works with his students in the English classroom, particularly focusing on the elements of inquiry-based teaching and learning. Followed by Maram, who would then share with you an Arabic example of how inquiry-based teaching and learning happens at the Universal American School Arabic classrooms in the context of Arabic as a foreign language. And hopefully we'll wrap it all up with some questions from you, because we really want to, it is all about inquiry-based, so we want to hear from you about what you shared with each other and how much we agreed or disagreed on what we're going to see here in this presentation. Just to put the presentation in context, the Universal American School is a world IB school in that we offer the International Baccalaureate Primary Years program from pre-K through grade 6. And we also offer the International Baccalaureate Diploma program for grades 11 and 12. In the middle school, that is from grade 7 through 10, we have our own conceptually based curriculum model that we create and in order to bridge the PYP and the IB Diploma program. What is the concept-based curriculum model? Well, it is basically a curriculum that's created drawing from best practices and research from across the world. Having said that, I would say we kind of more align towards Dr. Lynn Erickson's model of concept-based curriculum philosophy. When I keep repeating concept-based curriculum, what exactly does that mean, right? The fundamental idea of the curriculum philosophy is that we as teachers need to promote student understanding beyond memorization of facts and beyond just regurgitating content in their examinations or in their assessments. Having said that, I think it makes perfect sense to every single one of you sitting here in this room, because regardless of the curriculum that you come from, be it IGCSE or Arabic curriculum or CBSE or any of the curriculum that we offer in schools across Dubai, every single teacher wants to promote a model where students can apply their learning outside of their classrooms. Students can go away from our classes with those big ideas, or we call it enduring understanding in our terminology, that they can actually apply to different situations in real life as well as in different disciplines that they would encounter within a normal teaching day. So I'm hoping then what we say is actually connected to what we do in everyday classroom practice. Talking about the terminology itself, curriculum field today is full of jargon, right? We as teachers, we know differentiation, higher order thinking skills, critical thinking skills, teaching for conceptual understanding. There is so much under our umbrella that we need to get right as teachers of the 21st century. And linking it back to the DSIB indicators of teaching and learning, critical thinking, promoting higher order thinking skills, moving our students beyond the factual knowledge, which is what all of us as teachers kind of aim to get within our classrooms. I do think there is a lot of terminology, there is a lot of literature, but what is really missing is that articulate and practical strategy to make this transpire into everyday practice in our classrooms. And this is where Dr. Erickson comes into the picture by giving us a clear, articulate idea as to how we can promote and how we can initiate higher order thinking skills in the classroom. The fundamental idea Dr. Erickson proposes is that knowledge itself has a structure, as an inherent structure. At the bottom of the pyramid, a sort of a pyramid, let's say. At the bottom of the pyramid, as you can see, is the factual content, the content that goes into our disciplines, right? Which is not abstract, which is just locked in time, place, and situation. From the facts, we can extrapolate some concepts, some ideas that you can actually transfer across the disciplines. And because of their transferability, because of the inherent quality that you can transfer what you learned in English to social studies or science or math or even in real life, they kind of become a little more abstract than the facts and the topic itself. And from these concepts, we draw out what we call the big idea or the critical thinking idea that we want our students to go away with, right? Let me give you an example how it looks like in an English situation. Romeo and Juliet. Most of us deal with, and Maran will substantiate it with some typical examples in Arabic. But let's say for English, probably Romeo and Juliet is one of the texts we deal with in high school towards the diploma courses. The topic itself has got some text, some content that we will deal with our students in our classroom that will initiate some discussion. But what are some concepts, some abstract ideas that the students can take away from our lesson? Probably relationship, because that's all about relationship, all about emotions, right? And also about behavior patterns of human beings, how we behave, choose to behave in a particular situation, and how does that evoke consequences in our lives. So from these extrapolated concepts, I can draw out a big idea that probably says, student understands that strong emotions can alter the dynamics of a relationship. How powerful is that idea? And that idea is probably not just locked to the English classroom of today, it's probably applicable 100 years from today, and it meant the same 100 years before from today. Another big idea that I could probably give my students is to say, for instance, decisions made during emotionally challenging times can lead to irrational decisions, right? So when we make decisions when it's emotionally inclined, our decisions might be more, not so very rational as it should actually have been, which is probably what the entire play Romeo and Juliet brings out to us. Looking at that concept, I can actually apply it in my day-to-day life, in my work, because in my office or in my school, if I make a decision that's emotionally based, probably that's not the best decision that I'm making on that particular day. So this probably gives you some sort of a summary as to what we mean by teaching for conceptual understanding. So we not only talk about the text or the topic, we kind of extrapolate it to a little abstract thinking that the student can take away with them at the end of the lesson. How does the structure of knowledge lend itself to inquiry-based learning, which is what the topic is all about today? When I started out teaching in the inquiry-based classroom, when I was highly inexperienced and didn't know what it meant, all that I knew was inquiry means questioning, right? So I went away with my team, I brainstormed a lot of questions relevant to the topic, and then I kind of intersperse my lesson with a few questions here and a few questions there, thinking that I'm very abstract as a thinker and I'm very inquiry-based in my classrooms, right? Not so much. I think I was pretty confused when I look back at my inexperienced efforts of leading an inquiry-based classroom. It reminds me, I was just telling someone the other day, it reminds me of the salad that we have. We prepare the salad, and we kind of add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, and kind of, throw a question here, throw a question there, and we're like, okay, you should get it, right? I'm questioning you guys all about inquiry-based understanding. Not so much. So what Dr. Erickson recommends is from the structure of knowledge, you can actually take away what she calls the guiding questions or the compelling questions, which can be articulated in 3 different levels of abstraction and generality, right? So from the bottom of the pyramid that we saw before, the factual content knowledge, I can bring out some very fact-based questions, which is very important for my student understanding and for me as a teacher to make sure that my students understand the factual content. So factual questions basically seek to explore how my students understood the topic. Do they have the necessary elements in their toolkit in order to move ahead to the next level of abstraction, to the next level of thinking or the higher order thinking? From the factual question, we move on to one of the most essential elements in inquiry-based classroom, which is the provocative or the debatable question. As the title suggests, it primarily provokes us to think. It compels us to debate. And this is particularly important in international schools today. And when I say international schools, it's pretty much any school in Dubai because they're all international in their own perspective, I guess. So it basically gives the students to articulate their perspectives, their cultural, their religious, their ethnic, their national, their international perspectives, and kind of sum it all up together in a very persuasive fashion in a formalized engagement of debate and knowledge understanding. So provocative questions, because of the nature of the questions, there are no right or wrong answers because it depends on my perspective. I can look at a particular thing in a certain way and somebody else can look at it in a different way. It doesn't mean X is wrong or Y is right. It's just a different perspective of looking at the same issue. I would take a minute to say when we include provocative debatable questions, we need to make sure we don't throw in far too many because we do not want to follow the philosophy of inch deep, mile wide, kind of skim through a lot of topic but not actually getting anywhere in depth. So it's a good idea to restrict provocative debatable questions to maybe 2 or 3 so that we can actually explore them in depth. We have the time, the energy, the facility to explore it in depth to lead to our next level, which is the abstract level or the level of higher order thinking skills, which we call the conceptual questions itself. So going back to the top of the pyramid where we said strong emotions can alter the dynamics of a relationship. So one of the conceptual questions I could probably ask is, how do you think strong emotions kind of reflect human behavior? How do you think emotional behavior reflects human decisions, and how are they rational or irrational in that particular situation? So here, what we are doing is kind of articulating in our head as teachers, before we go into the classroom, in the curriculum material, what are the questions that will lead an inquiry-based classroom in order to promote scaffolding of student understanding from factual to the conceptual or from the fact-based to the higher order thinking skills. So this kind of wraps up the idea that we are trying to say in terms of what's concept-based teaching and understanding and how does this particular element of compelling questions or guiding questions in the structure of knowledge promote inquiry-based teaching and learning. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to allow Jason to take over because he's going to share with you how this actually transpires into his English classroom setting. So
as we're talking about the concept-based curriculum and compelling questions, I encourage you to keep in mind one of the buzzwords that we're hearing a lot these days in education, and that is the idea of differentiation. And using compelling questions like this, where you have 3 different levels of questions, it's such a great way to differentiate your units and also to differentiate your lesson for the day. The questions that you're asking your various students You want to make sure that you've got factual questions, the provocative, debatable questions, and those conceptual questions can also allow you to deal with the different levels of students that you might have in your classroom. When it comes to English, we look at 4 preliminary things before we even come up with our questions. That's going to compel us to design our units. That's going to, like I just said, help us to design our lessons for the day. And they aren't necessarily in this order at all. For example, what we're going to see is a unit that we designed for an 8th grade poetry class, and for an 8th grade poetry unit. And the first thing that we thought of was the course standards. And these are standards that our school has adopted that we need to make sure that we're satisfying throughout the year, that we're satisfying these units. And so then we're looking at the developmentally appropriate age for our students as we're looking at what we're going to teach when it comes to poetry. And then, of course, what is the conceptual lens? And this is where it gets into the concept. We broke our year into 4 conceptual lenses. The first one that we dealt with was identity. And we started looking through how people identify themselves as individuals, how we identify ourselves by nationality, and various other forms of identity. The second quarter of the year, we dealt with relationships and how human beings interact with nature, how human beings interact with each other, how we interact with our families, and so on and so on. But it dealt with the interrelations that you might find within a text. With this particular unit that we're looking at when it comes to poetry, we looked at conflict. We thought that talking about conflict in a much more peaceful manner would allow us to deal with how human beings need certain things from one another, and that fuels a basic behavior. So we looked at poetry under the conceptual lens of conflict. And then the last one that we'll deal with this year is on culture. So we'll sort of tying in all of the 3 concepts that we've already had to then discuss the content under the lens of culture. So just to give you a brief glimpse at this, and of course you don't have to read all of this, we can email this to you, but this is sort of a good map out of everything I just said that comes from those 4 different topics of content, appropriate age, the course standards, and the conceptual lens. We've got here the concept is of conflict, and there's a couple of enduring understandings that we want to make sure that the students know by the end of the quarter. For instance, understanding that language can convey an intended meaning to an audience. You'll notice that there's nothing about poetry in there, or that you can understand that imbalances in power can lead to conflict. So now our concept is leading us, and we're using poetry, our content, as a vehicle to lead us towards these generalized understandings that we want our students to have. Over here on the right, these are some of the facts or the skills that we know that our students are going to need to have in order to accomplish and obtain those understandings. For instance, they need to know how to analyze diction, style, or any of the other things you would to analyze poetry. So then what we end up with is our compelling questions. So here's a couple of examples of the compelling questions that might come from that base level of just facts. Stylistic features, and the difference between verse or prose. And of course, you can make these facts anything that you want, as long as you're basically coming up with a die-hard answer. That's what a fact-based question is. So our debatable or provocative questions could look something like this. Can poetry make a difference? Or is poetry necessary in today's society? There's an open-ended question to this that allows for debate in the classroom, that allows for us to be able to hear a back and forth amongst our students. And this is also where we might start seeing that our students are asking questions of themselves, and asking questions to each other, and asking questions to us. Yes, but now that I know this skill, now that I understand about society, now that I understand these ideas about conflict, what if And so then we start seeing the questions generate in the classroom, and then that helps us, it compels us to figure out where we're going with our concepts, and then later on where we're going to go with our assessments. So you might have these concepts at the end where you're asking your students, how can the imbalance of power lead to conflict? And you know that that's a direct correlation to the enduring understanding that we were looking for at the beginning of the unit. And then that leads us, of course, to how our compelling questions are inspiring our assessments. For example, with this unit here, we felt that having quizzes every 10 days in order for us to find out where our students are with the facts is helping us in one way, and then being able to ask them discussion questions throughout the day and also in the middle of the quarter will allow us to understand where they are with the compelling questions. And ultimately what we're looking for a summative assessment would be that they are generating their own poems. And for a summative assessment, they will be producing a portfolio of different forms of poetry with different topics. And again, that leads to them having to ask some very good questions for them to decide what it is that they're going to write. Okay?
أقدم الآن نفس النموذج ولكن باللغة العربية. كيف نتناول هذا النموذج باللغة العربية؟ قسم اللغة العربية وقسم تعلم اللغة العربية كلغة أجنبية. طبعا نحن في المدرسة الثانوية في المدرسة العالمية الأمريكية نقسم الطلبة إلى مجموعة من المستويات، مستوى مبتدئ، ثم ننطلق إلى المستوى ما قبل المتوسط، مستوى المتوسط، ثم مستوى ما قبل المتقدم، ثم المستوى المتقدم. طبعا بخصوص ما يتعلق بالمنهج والمفاهيم التي نطرحها للدرس هي تقريبا متقاربة مع المفاهيم المطروحة باللغة الإنجليزية، وهناك مثلا المسؤولية، الثقافة، التواصل، الخدمات، الطعام، الصحة، الهوية والخيارات. طبعا هناك عدة مفاهيم أخرى، ويستطيع الطلبة أيضا الإتيان بمجموعة من المفاهيم ونحن نأخذ ذلك باعتبارنا. يعني من الممكن أن نسأل الطلبة عن ما هي المفاهيم الكبرى التي يحبون أن يدرسوها ونستطيع أن نأخذها بعين الاعتبار. طبعا هنا أعددت نموذجا من تصميم الوحدة وهو للمستوى المتوسط الذي أدرسه أنا. بالمناسبة من الممكن أن نرى نفس المفهوم يدرس لطلبة المستوى المبتدئ أو المستوى المتقدم، وهنا إما تكون الأسئلة أكثر سهولة أو أكثر تعقيدا، هذا طبعا يتبع المستوى الذي يدرس. طبعا هنا سأقدم نموذجا مختلفا لتصميم الوحدة عن النموذج الذي قدمه زميلي باللغة الإنجليزية، لأن المنهج مرن يتيح لنا أن نتعامل معه بطريقة مرنة، فمن الممكن أن يصممه معلمو اللغة الإنجليزية بطريقة ويصممه معلمو اللغة العربية بطريقة أخرى وبقية المواد. هذه الوحدة أتناولها مع تلاميذي في المستوى المتوسط عن حياة المدينة والخدمات. المفهوم الأساسي هو الخدمات، ومن الممكن أن نضيف إليه مجموعة من المفاهيم المساندة أو المفاهيم الإضافية. حياة المدينة، النظام فيها كيف يكون النظام سهلا أم معقدا، المواصلات، الخدمات والتسوق. طبعا هذه نماذج من الأسئلة التي نطرحها. هنا نحن وضعنا المفهوم الذي نريد أن نطرح عنه مجموعة من الأسئلة، وكما قلت سابقا هذه الأسئلة موجودة في المستوى ما قبل المتوسط وقد تكون موجودة في المستوى المتقدم ولكنها أكثر تعقيدا. فمثلا هنا سؤال حقائقي، أين تعيش؟ ثم سؤال لتعزيز المفهوم. سؤال تعزيز المفهوم هو نفسه الذي طرحه زميلي جيسون Conceptual Question. حاولت أن أعطي الترجمة حقها ورأيت أن أفضل ترجمة هو تعزيز المفهوم لسؤال Conceptual Question. ثم السؤال التحفيزي والذي يتيح إجراء مناقشة في الصف. هل يساعد النظام في المدينة على تسهيل الحياة؟ طبعا السؤال هنا يتم طرحه في الصف ويقوم التلاميذ بالنقاش، ولا نستطيع أن نقول له أنت مصيب أو أنت مخطئ، هذا عبارة عن نقاش يقوم به الطلاب. المفهوم الثاني هنا مفهوم المواصلات. أسئلة حقائقية: كيف تأتي يوميا إلى المدرسة؟ عدد أنواع المواصلات التي تراها من حولك. هنا سؤال لتعزيز المفهوم: ما وسائل المواصلات التي تستخدمها في دبي؟ وبالنسبة للسؤال التحفيزي هو السؤال الذي يتحدث عن البيئة. وسائل المواصلات مفيدة لكنها تؤثر سلبا في البيئة. هذا يتيح طبعا مناقشات، وليست فقط مناقشات إنما هي تقديم حلول. أما موضوع التسوق، فمثلا كم مرة تذهب للتسوق في الشهر؟ إلى أي الأسواق تذهب؟ مسألة المساومة، فبعض الطلبة يفضلون، فوجئت أن البعض يفضل المساومة ويفضلون الذهاب إلى الأسواق التي تتيح لهم الحصول على المنتج بسعر أرخص، بينما طلبة آخرون يفضلون الذهاب إلى الأسواق الكبيرة التي فيها السعر ثابت. وهذا طبعا راجع إلى آرائهم، وكانت هذا السؤال تحديدا كان مادة رائعة للنقاش في الصف. وبالنسبة للاقتصاد عند التسوق وإعطاء الأمثلة، وهو سؤال لتعزيز المفهوم. أسئلة الخدمات طبعا بنفس الطريقة: سؤال حقائقي، سؤال تعزيز المفهوم. السؤال الأخير كان للمقارنة بين الخدمات والتسهيلات في دبي ومدينة أخرى، واقترحنا أن تكون المدينة التي جاء منها الطالب، إن كان قد عاش فيها، إن كان قد أمضى مدة من الزمن هناك، فيستطيع عندئذ المقارنة بين مدينته ودبي. طبعا هذا النموذج لتصميم الوحدة، وأنا أحضرت معي نموذجين، واحد من المستوى المتوسط وواحد من المستوى ما قبل المتوسط، لمفهومين مختلفين. إن أحببتم الاطلاع على هذه النماذج فهي موجودة معي بعد انتهاء العرض. بالنسبة للتقييمات، طبعا يجب أن نضمن التقييمات أسئلة تتعلق بالمفهوم. يعني التقييم في اللغة العربية معروف أنه يضم قواعد، يضم إملاء، ما إلى ذلك، لكن نحن في منهجنا يجب أن يضم التقييم سؤالا أو سؤالين من خلالهما نستطيع أن نعرف كيف فهم الطلاب ما كنا نتحدث عنه. وطبعا هذه التقييمات يجب أن تعالج مكونات تفكير الناقد في الوحدة: فهم، معرفة، حقيقة، كما قلنا سابقا، وهي طبعا تعالج القاعدة العمومية التي كنا نتحدث عنها، أي المفهوم الكبير الذي بدأنا به الحديث. طبعا الآن سأعطي المجال لسدى للأسئلة. Questions and answers.
أختي الفاضلة، العرض اللي كنت فيه عرض رائع، معلومات جيدة، لكن السؤال المطروح: هل يستطيع الطلاب أن يتفاهم معك ويتفاعل الطالب باللغة العربية من خلال الطرح الذي قمت فيه؟ أنا معك أن أقدم طرح مثلا عن المدينة، المقارنة عن المدينة، لكن هل أستطيع أن أطرح هذه الأسئلة على طالب لا يتكلم اللغة العربية باللغة العربية؟ هل يفهم الطالب هذه اللغة؟
طبعا أنا سبق وفي بداية الحديث قلت أن الطلبة مقسمون إلى مجموعة من المستويات: مستوى المبتدئ، ولدي زميلة هنا تعلم المستوى المبتدئ بالمناسبة، ونحن نتدرج في هذه الأسئلة. ولكن في البداية علي أن أعرف الطلاب مثلا كلمة concept هي مفهوم، فعندما آتي إلى الصف وأقول أريد أن أناقش المفهوم، يفترض أن يكون الطلبة من جميع المستويات يعرفون ما معنى كلمة مفهوم. فبالبداية نضع المفهوم. أنا مثلا في الأمس كنت أناقش مفهوم الثقافة مع طلاب الصف العاشر، وهم طلاب أجانب، جميعهم أجانب. وضعت كلمة الثقافة على السبورة وسألتهم ما معنى هذه الكلمة، وفوجئت أن بعضهم يعرف، حتى الطلبة الأجانب. يعني الذي أجابني كان طالبا أمريكيا. ثقافة هي كالتشر. وبدأنا بعد ذلك نعطي مجموعة من المفاهيم المساندة، وهم يعرفون، يعني ربما قد سمعوا هذه الكلمات من زملائهم في الأقسام المختلفة. طبعا لا شك أنك تحتاجين إلى بعض اللغة الإنجليزية، هذا وارد في صف يتعلم به الطلبة اللغة العربية كلغة أجنبية ليست لغة ثانية بالمناسبة. فتستطيعين أن تديري النقاش حسب المستوى الذي تتحدثين فيه لأي طلبة.
About the inquiry base and qualitative thinking, because those days a lot you hear about critical thinking,
right,
and the research is going on that if our students know how to think, or we have to teach them to think first. So if you just from your experience and you are a curriculum designer, how you applying the critical thinking while the teacher are teaching?
Yes. Absolutely, that's a very good question, and I would reflect on my personal experience as a teacher when, So we all we try and aspire that our students should be critical thinkers. We want them to be reflecting higher order thinking skills. Now, what I did when I was much more inexperienced and did not understand how this worked is in my head, I knew where my students had to be, right? I want them to think the big ideas. But when I made my curriculum material and when I delivered my lessons in the classroom, I just talked to the factual level, all right? But when I went to sit down and write an assessment, I suddenly became this conceptual higher order butterfly, and I started throwing conceptual questions at my students, saying, of course, I've given them all the facts. They should be able to make those connections and write it in the exam. So I kind of assumed it is happening in their brains, which was a biggest mistake that I was doing. So my recommendation is, and that's why we really think this model works, because when we as curriculum creators sit down to create the curriculum, we articulate what is the big idea we want to do, rather than just assuming that's going to happen in my lesson anyways, right? That's one thing. The second challenge in this curriculum, because everything has both sides, the second challenge is when we sit as a team, we are thinking this is the big idea we want them to go. But you know what's most beautiful? When students start discussing with provocative and debatable questions, they come up with totally opposite ideas, which I think Maram covered in her Arabic presentation. They bring out a totally different idea, and we think, hey, why did not I think of it? Because it needs to step out of the notion that we know it all. We kind of guide them, we kind of support them, but sometimes the understanding, the thinking that students can come up with based on their background, it's simply amazing. So I think this model actually helps us because we actually sit down and put it on pen and paper. What is the critical thinking that we want to come up? And then we kind of match it up with what's actually happening in the classroom. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I would like to ask you, ma'am, can you tell me any useful Arabic grammar book for those who are non-Arab? And about those students who say that why should we learn Arabic?
This question is, what is the grammar book that you use and how do you answer?
To talk in English or Arabic? Is it translated to you?
أنا أريد أن أسألك.
Yeah, I know, but how you want me to answer in English? You have the translation there or no?
No, English is good.
Okay. First, students now, most of my students, they know that Arabic language has a great importance. And especially from the people who are coming to work in the Gulf area. They know that knowing Arabic as a foreign language is something supportive to their CVs later when they want to work. So that's why many of them want to learn Arabic. More than maybe Arabic students sometimes. They want to learn it as foreign language. For the grammar, we are using a book called Al-Asas. This book has something related to conversations and how you do statements in Arabic and so on. And also it has parts of grammar and it's full of grammar. For example, for me in intermediate level, we give them pronouns, we give them prepositions, we give them adverbs in Arabic. And they started to know, for example, that harf jar stands for preposition. Adverb stands for ظرف, and so on. So they practice this and they know many grammar, especially when they go to intermediate, upper intermediate, and the advanced level. We should give them some grammar because they will be able to do their writing.
So the name of the book?
الأساس. الأساس في تعليم اللغة العربية.
So written by?
عفواً.
Who is the author?
Author of the book.
It's Dr. Fawzia Badr. I think she is a Jordanian lady. And I'm not sure if it is available in the libraries.